Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Against Me, called Shapeshift With Me. You know, I'm not sure what to expect out of Against Me anymore. Granted, they've taken a career trajectory that isn't that unfamiliar for long-running punk acts. They start off with a few critically acclaimed, very insightful albums with great hooks to boot. They get signed to a major label and subsequently lose a fair amount of that insight and grit in order to cater to a larger audience. And soon after that well runs dry, they return to the indie scene, perhaps never to regain that old spark, but maybe regain some critical respect or perhaps some of their cult following back. And from what I can tell, that seems to be exactly what happened with Against Me, but with a bit of a twist. Not only did frontwoman Laura Jane Grace come out as transgender and transitioned before her last album, it became the focal point of her 2014 release Transgender Dysphoria Blues. And not only did it inject the band with some fresh subject matter, it also further accentuated a ragged edge that had long been lacking in their material. Now, that album is far from perfect. It still felt a little bit underwritten, and I got the impression that the transgender themes could have been expanded a little bit more as subject matter that is so rarely explored even in punk, but for lack of a better word, and please forgive the pun, it felt a little bit of a transitional album. But now, it's 2 years later, and Against Me, they've got a new album ready to go with reportedly more of a romantic focus in the tracks, which I thought was a solid idea for the shift, given that this is the area that I thought could do with more exploration coming off Transgender Dysphoria Blues, especially if they were ditching the more aimless protest songs that I felt bogged down that album. So, okay, I'm on board. Did Shapeshift With Me really stick the landing? Well, actually, I'd argue it really did, to the point where I'd say this is a better album than Transgender Dysphoria Blues. I'm not gonna drag out the very tiresome argument whether this album is up to the level of their first two records. That was well over a decade ago. The band is in a considerably different place. But Shapeshift With Me is, at its best, probably comes closest to the rough-edged grit that characterized those albums. Less ramshackle, of course, but more thick and jagged. And with the writing that feels significantly more focused while maintaining a lot of the personality, yeah, I really like this. This is a great album. So let's start off with the instrumentation and production, where I feel this album will be the most contentious. Mostly because lead-off single Crash is not a particularly strong representation of the album. It doesn't quite have the bite with that flattened guitar line, even if I do dig the more prominent bass. In fact, if we're looking for one considerable shift from Transgender Dysphoria Blues to this, it would come in the mixed balance. The bass and lower range of the guitars pick up a lot more body and range, able to smolder and seethe in order to balance out against the melodic hooks that have always been Against Me's biggest asset. And while I might like the pop-punk styling of 1203 very early on this album, the record really hits its stride with delicate Petite and Other Things I'll Never Be, with the deeper smolder and the echoing off-kilter lean into the whammy bar on the guitar, which still has a great melody driving that hook. And from there, this album just cruises for a phenomenal midsection, from the sharper main riff on the other main single 333 with a fantastic hook, to the interweaving murky grooves on Haunting Haunted Haunts that treads right up to the line of a spaghetti western melody, which somehow gets even filthier tone on Dead Rats, isn't afraid to even break towards hardcore. And hell, even though it's a brighter and bouncier song, I really did like the reckless exuberance that made Rebecca one hell of a delirious love song. Sure, it's more pop-punk, but who cares? It's great pop-punk. Now, that's not saying that the darkness always works. As much as I like the trashier bass line on Norse Truth, the melody on the hook just didn't really connect with me as much, but this is definitely a record where it shines when it gets a lot more of that texture and grit, which is one reason I'm not entirely wild about the final two songs on this album, particularly the addition of backing vocals from Béatrice Martin of Canadian indie pop band Cour de Pirate. Now, I don't know if this is because that she was dating Laura Jane Grace at the time that she was here, but the vocals, they don't really blend well, and outside of some smoky interplay on the bridge, it's a little bit of an underwhelming closer, at least on an instrumental level. Of course, Laura Jane Grace is too much of a fearsome presence to make them that underwhelming, and once again, she is fantastic here. A fair bit has been made of her faster, borderline spoken word cadence that she adopts on a couple songs, which reminds me a lot less of hip-hop and more of Say Anything, or maybe early Frank Turner. The latter of which you see some similarities definitely in the melody lines as well, and I really do appreciate how expressive of a performer she is. There's a lot of acid and wild emotion on this album, but she's smart enough to ease back, Maybe not get outright melodic, but definitely subtle enough to convey things between the lines when she's not howling her lungs out. She really throws herself into this album. And really, if I want to point to an area where this record shines beyond just the texture and the hooks, it would be in the writing, lyrics, and themes. Grace mentioned in the lead up to this release that her focus was on writing songs that broke down the emotional dynamics and relationships that came with being trans and that were slightly different. Love songs that were informed by the trans experience, not just focusing on it. Take Boyfriend, which even Grace acknowledges falls in the vein of Tegan and Sarah's similarly titled song from earlier this year that pushes away from being an alternative sexuality experience for this person and to consider the person and reality beneath all of it. Laura Jane Grace is simply far more direct and visceral about that sort of approach. That's one thing that I really love about her writing, and where the Say Anything comparison becomes a lot more pronounced. The emotions that Grace evokes in her writing are powerful, and the language she uses isn't afraid to get graphic and frank and gripping, but it never feels stylized. She might reference death portrayed through art on 333, but the core of that song focuses on taking that frank expression, pitching out all the cynicism surrounding death, and being willing to accept someone with the demons you know and even the demons you don't know. Songs like Delicate, Petite, and Other Things I'll Never Be shows how she doesn't want your pity. She's dealing or has dealt with her own personal demons. She just wants it raw and real in the relationship. And even if it's just sex on Rebecca, that wild, earnest passion is compelling regardless. And man, she's got a knack for some bitter heartbreak tracks like Haunting, Haunted, Haunts, and even the darker Dead Rats and the desperation of Norse Truth, with framing all the more conscious of her own impulses to seek out rough or potentially dangerous situations and partners. She might judge her ex, but she judges herself a lot harder. On songs like Suicide Bomber, she confronts the terrifying possibility not just to love a monster in the future, but how consuming such a love could be for her, and makes the final track, All This and More, have a lot of weight as she tries to put aside a hookup that she has to forget for her own sake. Where 1203 finds solace in knowing that she's got friends to go outside of a neglectful relationship, All This and More, it tempers a lot of that recklessness. There's an emotional toll that she'll probably end up paying, but she's got control of it. She's got her own choice. And like with Lydia Lovelace's album Real earlier this year, the choice and the passion behind it makes things actually interesting. I really like a lot of the lyrical explorations here. But in short, I really dug this album. The writing is sharp and visceral, the melodic hooks are absolutely fantastic, Laura Jane Grace continues to be a hell of a presence behind the microphone, and the compositions are more diverse in their choice of tones and production, while for the most part still maintaining a lot of focus and bite. And for a punk album nearly 20 years in for this band, you really can't ask for more than that. For me, late 8 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation. I'm not sure there's a song here that's as immediately catchy as something like True Trans Soul Rebel, but overall this is a more consistent and sharply framed album that grows on me all the more with every single listen. Definitely check this out, you won't regret it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here. Did you guys think this was a pretty good Against Me album? I really came to like it a lot, but I can imagine it might be a little bit contentious, as you would typically expect for a late period Against Me. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.